So today's about peak experiences, and perhaps we'll have one today. The psychologist Abraham Maslow talked about self-actualization, as many of you probably know. And he said self-actualization was measured through what he called peak experiences. And a peak experience is when a person experiences the world or the universe or life for what it is, with feelings of euphoria, joy, wonder. And an example of a peak experience would be one where the Apollo 14 astronaut, Edgar Mitchell, had a very profound peak experience that changed his life. And it was when he was coming back from the moon in the module, the orientation of the ship was that it would rotate as it came back, because it had to have certain exposure to the sun. And he said as it was rotating, the orientation of the spacecraft was such that at every rotation you would progressively see the sun, the moon, the earth, and of course all of the stars. So it was this rotation of all of this stuff in space like every 2 minutes. And Edgar Mitchell had this profound experience in the Hindu tradition. It's called samadhi, where you might be seeing things separate, but you're experiencing them as a unity. And Edgar Mitchell had this samadhi experience in outer space. And it changed the rest of his life, because when he came back to Earth, he founded the Institute of the Noetic Sciences. And it was all about researching things like peak experience and the power of the mind. So my own earliest peak experience, the one that I remember, was when I was 7 years old. And I was in bed, and at some point in the night, I don't know if I awoke or just realized, experienced myself floating above myself in bed. And it wasn't a dream. It didn't feel like a dream. It felt absolutely real. And I was just looking down at my body from above. Like if the ceiling weren't there, I would have kept floating, is what the feeling was like. And at the time, after I had that, I suppressed it, because I really didn't have anybody to process that experience with. However, it stuck with me all these years. I mean, this is almost 50 years later, and I still have this really vivid memory of this peak experience that I had floating above myself in bed. And let me just ask really briefly, just quick show of hands, how many of you have had some sort of, like what you might call a peak experience like that? Where you just, and it doesn't have to be like mine, it could just be something where it was, this is really profound, like, wow, this doesn't happen on Earth at all, right? So a few of us. And my own peak experience, that floating above myself in bed, caused my desire to have it again. You know, as I was able to process it later on in my life, it's like I really would like to have that again. And it also caused me to be curious. It caused me to be curious about the spiritual or the esoteric realm. And it was in a way that wasn't dogmatic, because I grew up Roman Catholic, went to church every Sunday, and somehow this experience that I had of floating above myself was completely different from anything that I would have learned about in church. So I had this curiosity to understand more, or to be open to the spiritual experience in general. And then it also made me curious to explore what I call the sensuality of spirituality. And what I, to this day, love doing is, if I come upon a church and I kind of have free reign, I will explore the whole place, from basement, to steeple. And it doesn't matter, how old the church is, how ornate, how simple. But I have this compulsion. I could go into a church and just explore it and really soak it in. And as well, I think I've probably shared this before, I grew up Roman Catholic, which was my mom's faith. My dad was Eastern Catholic, like the Byzantine or the Orthodox. And in the Byzantine tradition, there's a great amount of sensuality in the Mass experience. The whole Mass is sung. There's a lot of incense. The garments that the priests wear are much more ornate. There's imagery on the walls, iconography. There's actually, rather than a rice wafer for communion, there's real bread and wine. And to me, I didn't get to have that experience of going to the Eastern Catholic Mass that often. Usually it was once a year when my parents' anniversary came up, we would go. But I always just recall, like, this it was amazing because there was it engaged this whole other part of myself. It wasn't intellectual. It was very felt, a very felt sense. And I believe my peak experience made me curious about that and wanted to experience spirituality and life more fully. So my peak experience also helped me to normalize esoteric experience, because we've probably all experienced this if we're in conversation with somebody who doesn't necessarily live the same kind of spirituality that we do. They might question us, or they might think, well, that's kind of woo-woo, and I'm not really into that, and I'm a person of logic and science, and if you can't prove it to me, I don't believe it. So I believe I had this peak experience at this young age just to help to give me an appreciation for esoteric experience, that for many, if not most of us, some sort of spiritual experience is normal, even though we may not devoutly practice a faith tradition. It helped me not to judge others who have such experiences, and it helped me to live more deeply from faith than from logic. So as my life went on, beyond 7 years old, we all get socialized through school, and we learn we have to, go to work and kind of do things as the conventional consciousness would have us do it. And I became more of a person of logic as an adult. But then every once in a while, when I would meditate back on my that peak experience when I was 7, it helped keep me connected to some extent to a faith, to a deeper faith. And then once I found unity, I was able to nurture that much more deeply. Now, the caveat about peak experiences is suggested by its adjective, peak experience. So what goes up must come down. And I would hold, based on who I've talked to in my life, that many or most of us, we might have a peak experience, and some of you have identified yourselves as having one, but for a lot of us, it happens once and that's it. And I've talked to other people who've had peak experiences, and it might even be a phenomenon where that they feel like there's like an angel guiding them or inspiring them to do something, and it might even be something that kind of shows up regularly, but then at some point it disappears and it's gone. And it never comes back. And I never had the experience of floating above myself in bed again. So this happened when I was 7, it happened once, and that's the only time it's happened. And I can't say that I've had such a profoundly non-three-dimensional experience ever since. So in a way, having a peak experience and coming off of it almost feels like it's a cosmic trick, or it's a letdown, like we've been teased to have that. And then we wonder, well, why doesn't it happen again? Or why does it happen more frequently than it does? Or why does it just happen once for many of us? So as I've meditated on this idea, I go, here's the twist. A peak experience is the fuel to live a peak life. So as I mentioned, my peak experience, and I believe a peak experience for us all, drives curiosity. So when I was 7 to have my peak experience, it took me on a quest And the way that quest manifested when I was little, when I was a kid, was had this compulsion to explore around churches and kind of get into the sensual experience of it. And then as I got older, I became more curious about, well, what does it mean to have a spiritual life, and how does my spiritual life inform how I show up in the physical world? So it drives curiosity. A peak experience also expands consciousness. So like the Edgar Mitchell experience in outer space, expanding our consciousness of we might experience things in the 3D world as being separate, but yet we have some sense there's a unity. There's something that unifies it all. So it expands our consciousness. And then as that happens, it informs our values, how we show up in the world, how we treat other people, etc. And then a peak experience drives the evolutionary impulse. Because I'm sure we've all have asked ourselves the question at various points. It's like, why am I here? What's my purpose on earth? What am I here to do? And some of us may have even gotten down on our knees and say, God, why am I here? Show me what my purpose is. And I believe a peak experience can help us connect with that. It may not necessarily answer the question, but it puts us on that quest. And as we continue to question and we continue to seek, we get in tune much more deeply with our own inherent gifts, our talent, and then our purpose ultimately. And if we pay attention, we can experience what seems to be mundane phenomena as peak experience. So, for instance, have you ever just thought about a person, and not like you were even attempting to think about it, but the thought of someone crosses your mind, a friend, for instance, and then all of a sudden you get a phone call from that person. Or that person comes over to visit, or you run into them in the neighborhood or something, and it's just a thought, and then the person shows up. Or have you ever had a hunch, and there's nothing scientific about the hunch, you just have a hunch, a feeling about something, and then you follow your gut, and you follow that hunch, and it was the right thing to do. And have you ever had a hunch and didn't follow your gut, and you suffered the consequences of that? It's like, oh, darn, I should have listened to my gut. Have you ever sought the answer to a question in meditation and actually gotten the answer? Or a twist on that is, have you ever gotten just insights in the moment about something? Example of that for me is if I'm set the intention to create something, whether it write something or to produce something, and I know I set it as an intention. Oftentimes that's enough to get the cosmos going, and I'll get hits on it. So what I've come to do, like when I set an intention to do something, I'll just give the example. Let's say write a book, right? I'll start to carry around, or now on my phone, I just have a notepad app going, and I'll get these little hits, like these little lines will come through, and as soon as they come through, I just record them. And I know that's going to happen. And it's not anything I plan to do. It's not like I sit down and say, I'm going to sit here for an hour and come up with a whole bunch of stuff to write. But it's just setting the intention. And somehow that puts the cosmic machinery into operation, and then I start getting hit with insights and sentences and words and phrases and even little anecdotes. So and that's a kind of a peak experience. It's just to set the intention and then be prepared to receive. So what this all comes to is that your entire life is the peak experience. And we may have the very big, profound moment once in a lifetime that feels like unlike anything that we could ever have on earth, or unlike anything that anyone could ever provide us in the physical world. And we might regard that as maybe the one and only peak experience. And I believe that then that peak experience is there to teach us that all of our life is a peak experience. So Abraham Maslow identified behaviors of self-actualization. And I say that all of these behaviors contribute to life as peak experience, as well as our evolutionary impulse, the impulse to evolve. And some of those behaviors include experiencing life like a child, with full absorption in whatever the experience is, without judgment. Trying new things versus sticking to safe paths. Listening to your own voice instead of the voice of tradition, authority, or the majority. Avoiding pretense and being honest. The willingness to be unpopular if your views don't coincide with the majority. Taking responsibility and working hard, and then identifying your defenses and having the courage to give them up. And if you're doing any one or a combination of those things, you are living your life as a peak experience. And to further affirm this, let's go into meditation to make our own peak experience in this moment. So I invite us all to become still and comfortable. Just become attuned to your natural breathing rhythm. Just consciously feel the inhale and the air coming through your nose, down your throat, into your lungs, expanding your chest and your belly. And then with every exhale, the air exiting out through that reverse path. And with every breath, just allow your entire physical body to feel nourished, relaxed, sustained, and strengthened by the power of your presence and the power of the presence. And then I invite you to focus on that spot between your eyes and maybe about an inch back into your head. It's called the celestial gate. It's also the third eye chakra. And as you focus on that point, just open yourself to receive any insights, encouragement, wisdom, energy, and joy. As the divine's gift to you in this moment. Silently expressing gratitude for your life as the peak experience. And setting the intention that as you open the celestial gate, open yourself to receive. That as you go about your day, pay attention to what happens in your life, the little hits or downloads of information that you get, the downloads of wisdom, the direction, the intuitive direction, which isn't informed by anything in the physical world, but coming through a place deep in your own soul. And as you attune to the flow of wisdom, information, answers to your questions, and guidance from the divine, as you attune to all of that, remind yourself to take the moment to have that samadhi experience, to feel the unity of all that is supporting your individual self. And as your individual self is supported, know that you contribute back to the fullness of all that is, that you contribute to the oneness. That you as an individual self, nevertheless, are one part and an essential part of not only life on this planet, but as an aspect and an expression of the divine. That you are the divine incarnate. And as you attune to this vast, infinite field of oneness, this unified field, you fully trust, embrace, and feel joy that you are endowed with all of the skills, the talents, and the gifts to fulfill your place, to fulfill your purpose on earth at this time. And this is the work in consciousness that you devote yourself to doing. To feel ever more deeply connected in the unified field. And as that connection deepens, and as your awareness increases, and as your consciousness expands, you understand that your life is the peak experience. And know that you can return to this forum. You can return to this domain in meditation of having the peak experience. And the more that you do that, the more you'll feel it out in the world, even in the most mundane of human experiences. And then silently express gratitude for this time of your increased awareness, of expanded consciousness, of attuning to the truth of your ever connectedness to the unified field. To the truth that you are an expression of the divine. And then start to bring yourself back fully to your embodied being, just feeling the gravity of the earth holding you where you're seated. Bring your attention back to your breath and follow the power of your inhale as it fills your lungs, and then the exhale as you release. And then when you're ready, open your eyes, be here, and be aware right now. Amen and amen.